Morning, everyone. I've just started the webinar, so I'm just going to give it a moment for people to be able to log in and join us. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar of 2023. I hope everyone is well, and also want to wish everyone a really happy new year. If you can still do that when you're nearly at the end of January, I hope everyone had a restful holiday and is back fully charged for the new year. This year, as you can see, this month we are doing a What's New in Employment Law and also Immigration. So I'm joined by my colleague, Chris Harber. Chris, hi.
Morning, Emma. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good. And how are you feeling on this cold morning? Are you all refreshed and prepared for 2023?
Just about. A long and busy Christmas has seen us through. So 2023 is looking good. We've got another busy year ahead of us. I mean, when is it never busy? No, never not busy, rather, in immigration. So yeah, lots to look forward to this year.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've come back fully prepared, fully recharged, really super confident for 2023. I think there's lots going on. There's lots that employers can be doing, lots of training that employers are doing, fully packed for the first sort of quarter of 2023, which is amazing. So let's get started. Just before we do, just a bit of housekeeping. Obviously, we are live. The session is being recorded as well, so we will be sending out the YouTube link after the session. And for those of you who don't know Boyes Turner, we are a full commercial law firm based in the Thames Valley. We also have a thriving private client division as well, where we look after not only medical and clinical negligence cases, but also high net worth individuals as well through our wealth protection team. In terms of our employment team, we look after all aspects of HR, so day-to-day HR support, litigation. Our employment tribunal diary is very full, obviously with the backlog of cases that are coming through. Also, we assist with policies, contracts, training, and also with our business immigration team as well, which Chris will be talking to you about a little bit later on. So let's get started. What is going on in 2023, or what is planned, probably more importantly, for 2023? We are full. It's been a long time since I've had lots to talk about. But first and foremost, we have the rates of pay. We don't as of today have the unfair dismissal compensation rates yet. They will probably come out a bit later on, probably next month, so watch out for those. But we do have the statutory rates of pay. So there are rates for statutory sick pay, SSP, and also the increasing rate again from April this year for maternity, paternity, statutory bereavement, parental bereavement leave, and also shared parental leave as well. So we've got that increasing as well. But the weekly earnings limit, that's the base limit, that's statutory rate, is staying the same. And I know that many employers are looking at their sickness absence at the moment. We didn't have much sickness absence for the last couple of years, but that has started to creep up. Certainly, we're getting a lot of calls within the team about managing not just the long-term sickness absence, but the short-term, where you get sort of, patterns where it's very difficult to plan for those absences. So if you are finding that sickness absences is becoming an issue within certain teams, within the business, then do reach out. As I said, we are working with a number of clients, and it is something that we have noticed as a bit of a pattern. In terms of other statutory rates, we do have the rates for the national minimum and the national living wage, and they will be going up from the 1st of April, and we've got the rates there on the next slide. Just something to sort of bear in mind when we're thinking about changes to rates of pay. Obviously, check with your payroll. Are we paying individuals the correct rate for their age? And that's really important. Also think about when we're deducting any monies from pay, are we still reaching that threshold? Are we within the limits for being able to make deductions? And also it's a good time just to sort of be reflecting on pay anyway, in terms of, are we paying to the market? Do we need to look at what we're paying across the board? So just just a heads up, obviously rates are changing, but also perhaps a good time to reflect about where you are. And that sort of links in with the next slide as well, which is the gender pay gap. That seems to come up, doesn't it, quite quickly every year, where we sort of, breathe a huge sigh of relief on April the 5th when we've got our reports in. And then almost as soon as we've taken that sort of sigh of relief, here we are back again, thinking about the reporting date and getting our reports in for this year. So again, organisations that have that 250 or more employees are caught by the regulations. There was some talk during the leadership campaign, I can't remember which one it was, but there was some talk about potentially moving that limit to 500 employees, still something that perhaps may happen, but at the moment we still have the 250 employee cap. But it's not just organisations that are caught by the regulations that are actually undertaking these pay review and gender pay gap review sort of activities. We have a lot of clients that do it that aren't actually caught by the 250 employee limit. It's also a really good thing to think about doing, because it sort of sets you on that journey, particularly if you are growing, you're a developing business, to see where you are now in terms of where you might look, where you do hit the 250. But also as we're looking at being more diverse, as we're making sure that we sort of hit those equality measures, that we are taking steps to ensure that we do have equal pay between the genders. And of course, we do run the risk there of equal pay claims as well. So always something just to have on that radar, whether you're caught or not, looking at your pay, making sure you've got parity of pay is a really good thing to do, as well as being legally compliant as well. So yeah, 5th of April will no doubt come round again. Many of you will probably have heard us talk about and write about the employment bill. Now, the employment bill was something that was sort of much heralded in the Queen's speech a couple of years ago, and then it all sort of went quiet. And we were sort of, thinking, well, where's it gone? What has happened to the employment bill? Well, the employment bill itself still has not materialised, and it is very unlikely that it will materialise. But what we have seen is that many of the initiatives within it, the batons, have been picked up in private members' bills. And we have several of these bills that are actually going through Parliament at the moment, many of which have government support. So one would imagine that they are pretty much guaranteed to be passed. What these private members' bills are and what the regulations that we've got up there are, they aren't actually law in themselves, but what they will do is, if they are passed, if those regulations are passed, it will allow the relevant Secretary of State to then pass future laws. So this is where we've got sort of a bit of a delay in things. So even though things are going through Parliament now as these private members' bills, and we fully expect the regulations to be passed, the actual law, the laws that will need to be brought in to actually enact these separate private members' bills may take a little time to come through. So it's unlikely we'll see changes this year, more likely to be 2024. But I still think it's worth talking about it. It's worth having these changes on our radar. And also thinking more generally, I know that we've spoken a lot about attracting talent, retaining talent, how can we be that destination employer? And perhaps there are things that we could be thinking about now, about introducing, so that we are ready for when these laws will come into force. Just sort of taking them in turn. The flexible working rules. Now, many of you may have been involved in the consultation that came out sort of 18 months or so ago on this, where there were proposed changes to the flexible working rules. Some of those have been picked up on and are included within the private members bill. And the main changes that we should be looking out for and be prepared for is that flexible working will become a day one right. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, at the moment, employees have to wait 26 weeks, have 26 weeks continuous service before they are allowed to make a flexible working request. Remember, it is still a request to work flexibly. It's not a right to work flexibly. But certainly with it being a day one right, employers will have to think at that recruitment stage, at that advertising stage, and be prepared for people to ask, well, I'd like to work 3 days a week, or I'd like to work compressed hours. So it's really thinking, when we're advertising for roles, what a flexible role may look like, and where are those potential boundaries to a role being able to be worked flexibly, remembering that we still have those 8 statutory grounds for which to reject a request. Other changes to potential changes to the rules are that employees will be able to make 2 statutory flexible working requests every 12 months. At the moment, it is only 1. We will also see a potential shortening of the process. So from request to appeal, if we get that far, that's going to be reduced from 3 months to 2 months. But I expect there will be some mechanism within the regulations to allow that period of time to be increased. And the other point is that employees won't be required to state what impact, if any, their request will have on the business. So there won't be that need for employees to sort of go into detail as to what steps the employer may need to take to accommodate their request. So that's going. So yeah, changes planned for flexible working, but the big headline there is obviously day one right. The proactive duty to prevent sexual harassment, we're probably thinking, well, hey, haven't we got that anyway? But there's going to be a new set of rules, new code of practice on protecting against sexual harassment within the workplace. And sort of the main headline around that will be code of practice, so potential there to increase compensation if the code is not followed, and also the reintroduction of third-party harassment rights. So some of you may remember that was part of the Equality Act before it was removed, but there's going to be a reintroduction of that. So that's an obligation on employers to take steps, take measures, preventative measures, where there are complaints raised about sexual harassment from clients, from customers, and third parties. So one of the big pieces around here is going to be training, so making sure our managers are aware what their obligations are, where the risks may be, but again, really big point about taking those allegations seriously and not putting the emphasis back on the individual, on the victim, that they need to act and change their behaviours. So some work to be done, I think, around that. The extension of redundancy protection. So as we know, women on maternity leave, they have that right, that protection during maternity leave, that if their role is redundant, then they rank higher in terms of being offered suitable alternative employment than other individuals within the at-risk pool. Something to always be aware of. Don't forget your people who are on maternity leave, and also as a general rule, those on sick leave as well. But just turning back to the extension of redundancy protection. So that protection is going to be extended to, the proposal is that it's going to be extended to cover pregnancy. So not just on maternity leave, women on maternity leave, but during pregnancy, and also be extended to cover those individuals who are on adoption leave and also who are on shared parental leave as well. Now, that's not just for the period of leave, but also there is a proposal that protection is then going to be extended for a period of 6 months. At the moment, we think it's going to be 6 months from the point the individual returns to work. So some big changes there. Lots of planning is going to be needed if we are going to be running redundancy programs around how we manage that, again, how we ensure that we are complying with those proposed new rules. So yeah, some changes there to be aware of. A couple of changes around sort of, additional family leave protection. Carers leave, so 5 days unpaid leave is the proposal at the moment, where somebody needs to have time off to care for a dependent. Dependent is most likely going to be as we would normally look at it with emergency leave, but 5 days of unpaid leave there is going to be on offer, and neonatal leave and statutory pay there for individuals whose children are in or have had some neonatal care. It's going to be very interesting how that works in terms of parents. Is it going to be both parents that are able to take that time off, and how does that into play with things like maternity leave and also paternity leave as well? So it's going to be some interesting sort of works there, and also shared parental leave if a woman curtails her maternity leave shorter than sort of after the 2 weeks minimum maternity leave. So some interesting sort of ways that all this leave is all going to sort of fit together. Tips and trunks. There's been lots of consultation. I know lots of our hospitality clients have been involved in the consultations around this. The plan is to introduce legislation which will require employers to have a fair distribution of tips, but it's those tips that they can control. So not cash tips, but the sort of tips where you add, the service charge to bills. So employers are going to have a policy. It's going to have to be, if the individuals wish to, they are going to be able to see how the tips are allocated, see how this policy works in practice. So there's going to be a bit of work to be done around policies, making sure that they're fair, and making sure that the system of allocation is going to be workable. So watch this space on that point. Other possible changes as well. Fire and rehire. So this has been around, employers have used it. This is really where you have a situation where you're looking to change terms and conditions of employment. You go through your consultation exercise, perhaps a collective consultation exercise, depending on numbers of potential employees impacted. Go through our consultation exercise. And then if an employee refuses to accept the new terms and conditions, then you fire them on their existing terms, making sure that you give them their correct notice period under their current contract, making sure we comply with that current contract. And then the idea is then we rehire them, or we offer them re-engagement. We offer them to be rehired on the new terms and conditions. And there was a big brouhaha last year where P&O tried to do this, P&O Ferries tried to do this. There's also some litigation going through at the moment, also involving the practice of fire and rehire. So what the proposed plan is that there will be a new ACAS code, which will set out how employers can reasonably undertake the process of consultation. And if an employer does not follow the code reasonably, then if there is a subsequent claim that is brought, then compensation could be increased by 25%. So it's going to be a code of practice, but it's one of the codes of practice that is going to have teeth. So again, we need to see what the devil is in the detail with codes of practice, but really just a heads up that it is something that is being looked at. So really do watch this space. Another one we're going to have to see what happens, which is one where we have the political angle on this is obviously the strikes, the strike legislation that is being proposed, and the changes to that, which is really to ensure that in certain areas, certain sectors, particularly the public sector, that there are those minimum service levels. It's political. We will have to wait and see. The unions claim that actually this will encourage strikes to last for longer. There'll have to be a middle ground on this one, I fear. And so we'll just have to wait and see. But again, it's something to look out for. Now, potentially this last piece of legislation that I've got here could be huge. Whether it ends up being huge is, again, dependent on political will. But essentially, the aim of the snappily titled Retained EU Law Revocation and Reform Bill is that it's a bonfire of the vanities. I mean, essentially, it is looking at legislation which is EU retained law, so that law that was retained as part of the Brexit deal, mainly around the regulations that we have in the UK and UK law, but essentially it's encouraging every government department. There are currently 2,400 pieces of retained law, so government departments are basically going through all that retained law and saying, do we need it? If we so, let's keep it. If we don't need it, then let's revoke it. And the idea is that process is going to happen this year. However, there is, it's called the sunset period. And then at the end of this year, the aim is that, there will be a burning of red tape. There is an opportunity to increase that sunset period until June of 2024. So potentially watch that could be extended. But this could potentially have huge impacts for employment law and health and safety legislation. So if we think about the agency workers regulations, if we think about working time, holiday, there are lots of employment-based law that could be heavily impacted by changes under this bill. Ministers have already said, look, expect it to be in the hundreds rather than the thousands, and they're really looking at those pieces of legislation that impact on growth. So it could be one to watch. We simply don't know. What I would say is that if there are going to be potential changes, there will be consultation. So do look out, make your voices known about what laws you'd like to see the back of, or which laws that you'd like to retain. So this really is, as I said, it could be huge, it could be a bit, we don't know. So watch this space. Chris, over to you, and what's going on in the world of immigration?
Thank you, Emma. So it's going to be a good year. It's going to be a busy year as ever in the world of immigration. And at the moment, really, a lot of it is a little bit unknown. We know some things, but equally there are plenty of known unknowns, to use that phrase. We know there are areas where there will probably be changes that we haven't foreseen yet, but will come further down the line. So what I tried to do this morning, rather than cover every minutiae area of immigration legislation, I focused on the areas which I think impact you the most as the listener. So we're going to focus on the sponsorship system and how that's being utilised and amended and updated over the course of the year. We're going to look a little bit at international travel for those of you who are either bringing staff in from overseas frequently or indeed sending staff overseas on a regular basis. And then finally, I've called it the wild card. So what sort of things are going to happen potentially this year that we are never going to be able to predict, or at least certainly very hard to predict at least. So we'll start with the sponsorship system. Now, we're expecting there's going to be a continuing high demand for new sponsor licenses. So this slide and this graph here shows you the number of sponsor license holders in the United Kingdom going back to the beginning of 2014. And as you can see, the number was fairly flat for quite a long time. And then as we hit the end of freedom of movement, which is just here, the number of license holders spikes quite considerably. Now, the natural Conclusion to draw from that is that the end of freedom of movement presented a lot of labour shortages to a lot of industries. It presented a visa barrier to people who were moving to the UK anyway, who still needed to for work, and so they needed to go through the licensing process with their employer. There are also a number of factors that sit behind that increase, which are not necessarily directly correlated to the UK leaving the European Union. So things like COVID policies and the relaxation of international travel, more of a global outlook in terms of where you can work. So rather than feeling as an employer like you have to have certain employees in certain countries, there is more of a destination of choice. So an employee may want to work in a given country for a particular reason, whether that be family or cultural based, and there's more of a general trend towards that pattern at the moment as well. So there's a lot of factors that sit down why there's been such a high increase. Now, I think this increase is only going to continue over the next year, certainly for the very least. There are well over 2 million actively trading companies in the UK at the moment. So the fact that there are only just over 50,000 sponsor license holders shows that there is still a massive delta between the number of companies who are prepared and able to hire from overseas to those who don't have any facility to or not. Now, obviously, for that 2 million companies, not every single one of those is going to be either eligible for a license, or indeed they may be one company as part of a larger group of companies that has a license. Even if you boil that down to, let's say, for example, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 actually actively trading companies that might be looking to recruit at various levels, there's still a massive gap between the number of companies that have got a license and those that don't. So I'm expecting companies to continue applying for license over the course of the year. Now, linked to that is the Home Office's focus on sponsor license compliance and conducting visits and audits of sponsor license holders. Now, this has been going on ever since the introduction of the points-based system. Compliance visits are perfectly common. They happen all the time. Generally speaking, the Home Office will try and target companies where they have intelligence or knowledge that they're not necessarily using the system in the correct way, or they're not particularly diligent in the way that they're monitoring the system. So for the majority of sponsor license holders, you're never going to encounter this. But certainly with all of the guidance and all of the announcements that the Home Office have made over the last year or so around reforming the sponsor license system, they are very much putting sponsor license compliance at the front of their priorities. And that very much translates through when you look at the increased number of sponsor license holders. That's naturally going to result in an increase in those companies that are not necessarily compliant with the Home Office's rules. Now, I'm going to slightly contradict myself with the next slide when I show you the data on the actual level of compliance that the Home Office carries out. Now, as you can see, the general trend since 2012 is that there is a big reduction, or not a big reduction, a general gradual reduction in the amount of compliance action that the Home Office takes. So the blue line, just for a bit of reference, the blue line shows the number of sponsor licenses which have been suspended during that given quarter. And then the orange line shows this number of licenses which have been actually revoked during that given quarter. So as you can see, we hit a bit of a compliance peak around sort of 2014, 2015, and there's been a general decline since then. Obviously, during the COVID period, so during, sorry, let me go back one. During 2020, we've had a bit of a gap. So around here, there was effectively no compliance visits whatsoever because of obviously the lockdowns and things. And then we saw a massive pickup through 2021 up to the beginning of 2022. Now, the decline through 2022, this gap here is quite an interesting gap. Which needs, there's a few reasons for this. It's not quite as simple as to say that the Home Office are just not conducting compliance visits. They certainly are. There may be the case that you can say where there is those that are applying for licenses are doing it more diligently now. They're instructing people like myself to do the process for them, manage the process for them, which we are certainly seeing an increase in as well. So there may be that aspect. Probably more of a realistic reason as to why there has been that sudden sharp drop-off of compliance action from the Home Office is more to do with the fact that 2022 coincided with the invasion of Ukraine, and the resulting disruption and operational issues that the Home Office encountered around February, March time last year as a result of that. So across all aspects of the Home Office's sort of immigration command, so whether that's Border Force or UK Visas and Immigration or the Passport Office, the reopening because of COVID and then finally the invasion of Ukraine resulted in the Home Office being very close to an operational collapse over quite a few weeks. And so we saw, I think, 3 or 4 week period around March, April time last year, where the Home Office didn't casework any visa applications whatsoever under the work groups because they diverted all of their resources to the Ukrainian humanitarian flows and sorting those visa processes out. And the same is probably slightly translated here in the sense of they will have been diverting case officers who normally work on compliance to work on the Ukraine scheme. Now, I expect that this graph will tick up quite steep in 2023. So I am expecting, and certainly the Home Office are at least making the right sounds, that there will be an increase in compliance. So it's going to be really important over the next year, certainly, that you make sure that all of your record keeping is up to date. All of your access to your sponsor licenses are up to date. All of the details of your organisation are up to date on the sponsor license as well. And we'll look at a little bit about what that looks like in the next couple of slides. The next area that we think we're going to see a lot of work on over the next year is restructuring and mergers and acquisitions. Now, the level of corporate restructuring activity is going to remain very high, and I'm expecting this to continue over the course of the next year. Now, restructurings happen for a number of reasons, and they'll take a number of different various shapes and sizes. So whether that's just a reorganization of your existing corporate structure, you're going through mergers and acquisitions, you're selling off a part of the business, or indeed there you're going through a TB transfer process as part of that as well. All of these areas all have immigration consequences, effectively, for want of a better word. They all result in you needing to do something at some level if you are sponsoring, if you're recruiting migrant workers. Now, this is really, really important because this is quite often dropped off, and this quite often gets missed when you go through the risk register on what you need to tick off effectively when you're going through a restructuring or something similar. Very often we see clients will come to us a very, very short period of time before completion and say, just discovered that we've got 10 sponsored workers in the company that we're acquiring. We've no idea whether they've done any right to work checks. How do we do that effectively? That's a really, really common scenario for us. So the key things that you need to know when you're going through a restructuring or whether you're acquiring or selling off your business is you've got to know where the sponsored workers are, where the sponsor licenses sit, if you've got multiple licenses within the organization or outside of the organization that you're acquiring, where those sponsored workers are they typically transferring across to a different employer and a different license that needs to be reported to the Home Office. You need to know if there's a change to your ownership structure. So if your direct owner changes and you have a sponsor license, then you need to apply for a new license. It sounds very administrative, and to a certain degree it is, but that's sort of the Home Office's rules on licensing. So if you are, in the most simplest possible way, determined you are a business and one person owns your business, that person sells the business to another person, you need to apply for a new sponsor license for that. So there's a process you need to go through that, and there are set timelines that you need to be conscious of. If you're going through another type of restructuring, so say, for example, you're a part of a business that's being sold off to another business, then there's necessary reporting actions you need to make to the Home Office within certain days. So there's a lot of different aspects that you need to be considering if you're going through a restructuring or if you're going through any M&A activity whatsoever. We're also going to be looking at some hopeful reforms of the sponsor management system over the course of the next year. Now, for those of you who have a sponsor license, you'll be well aware that the sponsor management system is very old, very clunky, not particularly user-friendly at the best of times, and is indeed in need of some reform. So the Home Office have been going through a tendering cycle with IT providers to develop effectively a new sponsor management system for sponsor license holders. The idea of the reform is that it's going to give an awful lot increased capability to license holders. Much more visibility of your data, much more ability to actually proactively manage your license rather than having to ask the Home Office to do everything. So things like changing your authorising officer or requesting a change to your certificate of sponsorship allocation. So we're expecting come late 2023 there to be some announcements on how the new sponsor management system is going to look. The Home Office are very loosely dubbing it manager license at the moment. How it looks is yet to be determined. We are certainly expecting a fairly significant facelift on the way that it looks and your ability as a sponsor license holder to interact with the license. I thought I'm ideally looking forward to what a new system looks like using the SNS on a daily basis. Now, salary thresholds, and this relates back to what Emma was saying earlier around changes to the national minimum wage, which are upcoming. Now, inflation has pushed up wages quite significantly in 2022, which means that the existing salary thresholds for sponsorship could lead to sponsored workers being paid less than other workers in the same occupation. Now, it's almost certain that the Home Office will look to resolve this by increasing both the occupational specific salary thresholds and the actual general salary thresholds as well over the course of the next year. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see an announcement that coincides with the April changes as well. There is certainly at least one salary threshold which will, after the changes in April, be lower than the national minimum wage. So that's going to have to increase at some point to make sure that it's still relevant and current with minimum wage to avoid that delta that's going to appear. So I'm expecting some announcements probably around April time on salary amendments to the skilled worker thresholds. And then finally, and certainly not a small point at all, a very big point if you recruit from the EU and if you have operations in the EU. So since January, 1st of January this year, the Home Office announced that they were introducing a concession on the immigration skills charge. So if you are a multinational company and you have a global business mobility license, used to be known as the intercompany transfer license, and you transfer an existing member of staff who is an EU national to the UK from an office overseas, then the immigration skills charge is going to be waived as long as their assignment in the UK is no more than 3 years. Now, the effective rub of what this means is if you're a medium or large organisation, this is going to save you £3,000 over the course of that 3-year period. So if you move a lot of people, this is a fairly substantial cost saving to you. So it's really, really important that you make use of this as and when it comes in. As I said, this is only applicable to EU nationals, so this doesn't apply to the rest of the world. This is just an EU specific thing. Now, my view personally is that this is the government's first sort of tacit acceptance that the current status quo post freedom of movement isn't working. There was no fanfare over the announcement. There was no press release. This was just pushed out as an update to the immigration skills charge rules, and was only really picked up by immigration lawyers as it was announced. There was no lead or leaks for this whatsoever. So there's very little. Obviously, the government don't want to make a big song and dance over the fact that they're doing this. Nevertheless, I think there is a general acceptance, certainly within the Home Office and within the Treasury, that the current process isn't working and something needs to be done to make the UK a little bit more attractive to overseas workers. This is a very small, very targeted approach. And certainly when you put this against the context of possibly a reintroduction of austerity policies across governments, increased public borrowing, the fact that the government are willingly, without much public pressure at all, giving up a certain percentage of the visa application fees, that's a very clear indication that this is a serious thing that they are really not necessarily worried about, but he's very conscious and it's in front of their mind, and they need to be doing something active to address. Next, we've got a few little updates on international travel over the course of the next year. So with the end of the zero COVID policy in China, we have the reopening of Chinese borders and a reintroduction of Chinese citizens being able to travel internationally. Now, obviously, with the big spike of COVID increases in China, a lot of countries are introducing COVID testing for arrivals from China. The UK has implemented these changes. So for anyone arriving from mainland China, they need to have taken a COVID test before they depart to the UK. And in some cases, they may be retested when they arrive in the UK. This looks like Slick is set to continue for quite a long time, certainly until the COVID numbers in China at least show a very clear, very dramatic drop from the very high levels that they're at the moment. One of the biggest things that we're going to see this year in terms of international mobility and travel is the introduction of ETAs in both the UK and the EU. So electronic travel authorization, for those of you who travel to the US quite a lot, looks effectively the same as your ESTA. It's a pre-approval form that you fill out online, you'll pay a nominal fee, and that is your electronic authorization to enter the country. So this is going to be introduced for the UK focusing at the moment. This is going to be introduced for what's considered non-visa nationals. So typically, for example, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, a large majority of South America and the European Union as well. Where when you're traveling to the UK, you'll need to complete a form online. And then when you get to the border, that will be verified when you get to the border to make sure that your details are being captured when you arrive in the UK. A beta phase of this is going through at the moment. So with there is a small number of Gulf nations who already use a form of electronic travel authorization called the electronic visa waiver. They're trialing this at the moment to make sure that the operational aspects of it work properly. And once the beta phase is completed, then it's going to move to full rollouts for other non-visa national countries. And then going the other way, leaving the UK, the EU is going to be introducing at some point their own electronic travel authorization scheme. So might not necessarily be this year, but certainly we're going to have an awful lot more detail by the end of the year. When we travel to the European Union, we will start to need to fill out some level of pre-authorization form. There is a possibility that that may require some level of biometric capture as well. That's yet to be confirmed how the details and the actual nature of that's going to work, whether that's going to be at the border or whether there's some level of pre-screening using mobile phones. But there is certainly going to be some level of data capture for when we travel to the European Union going forward. So this is just another thing to think about if you're sending any employees around the world, or certainly to the EU over the coming years. And then just a last one from me before I look at just things that we can help you out on going forward. I always like to put in a wild card because inevitably with immigration and with the Home Office, there are a number of things which are going to happen over the course of this year, which we cannot predict. Last year, I mean, to say whether you could predict it or not is a different argument, but certainly the operational challenges that the invasion of Ukraine caused was fairly unsighted. None of us were really predicting that was going to happen. I remember having a coffee with a client almost exactly this time last year, pontificating about the ability to move Ukrainian citizens to the UK. They had an office in Ukraine, in Kyiv, and within 4 weeks, that had all completely gone out of the window. So there is inevitably things that will happen that we cannot see at the moment. So I've just put a few thoughts down there. They're entirely my thoughts. They're entirely my opinions and based on what we see from communications from the Home Office and things. Something I think we might potentially see is maybe a further concession on costs. So similar to the skills charge reduction for EU nationals, I think that the Home Office may look at another targeted, very specific concession on an element of the visa application fees for skilled workers to try and just improve the flow and mobility of skilled workers coming into the UK. And this is slightly linked to the second point that I put here around the divergence of rhetoric and policy, where the governments have their net migration figures, which are currently at about 500,000 a year. And there is a widespread agreement within government and certainly a public-facing policy that they want to reduce that net migration figure. Now, that obviously flies in the face of making visa and cost concessions. So you can say that the two are completely different. So I think on the one hand, we're going to see the government, the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister talking about the need to have strong controls over who enters the UK, and having a really clear control on making sure that the UK is only attracting skilled, highly paid, highly talented workforce, and not using the immigration system to undercut the labour market. And then on the other side, I think that we're also going to see some amendments to rules and potentially costs to make it slightly easier for companies and employers to recruit skilled workers from overseas. Like I said, there's very much a divergence of rhetoric and policy. The logic of it is confused. I know a lot of what the Home Office do is slightly confused, but I do think that there's going to be a big step change in the way that the Home Office communicate around certainly skilled workers and skilled labour over the course of the next year. There is a potential that the Youth Mobility Scheme could be expanded to more countries. So the Youth Mobility Scheme at the moment, as it exists, allows you to allows individuals from a certain number of countries to come to the UK for up to 2 years, effectively for a working holiday, really. So this is 18 to 30s. You need to have a couple of £1,000 of saving, and then you can come and you have free access to the UK labour markets. And they're very much reciprocal arrangements. So they are a bilateral agreement between the UK and the given nation. So the primary country that uses it is Australia. So about 30,000 is the cap a year on how many Australians can come to the UK under this system. One thing which is being mooted and one thing which is potentially in the pipeline is that those bilateral agreements may expand to other countries, including EU member states. Now, the Youth Mobility Scheme does rely on a bilateral agreement with a particular nation, so it'd be very difficult to implement an EU-wide policy for the whole EU bloc to have access to a Youth Mobility Scheme. Probably going to be more targeted on a country-by-country basis. But again, this is one of those areas where it comes back to my idea on the divergence of rhetoric and policy, where it's a small, targeted, focused area where the Home Office can make a relaxation, which will allow a certain degree of labour into the UK for a limited time period, where they can still say that we're maintaining a control on the border, we're maintaining effective control over net migration figures, but they're just allowing companies to just have that little bit of freedom to recruit a little bit more and to ease some of the labour issues that are in the UK at the moment. And then finally, I've just said operational shocks. So as I said, with the Ukraine invasion last year, we saw the Home Office really struggle on an operational level for quite a while, right the way through until the end of the summer. The Home Office had real serious operational issues. It really is the nature of the beast with the Home Office. Any shock of a severe level is enough to really put the Home Office in quite a difficult position. We saw at the end of last year where they had some IT issues with the implementation of a new system they're using. Again, there was a 2-3 week period where everything just went out the water and processing times fell apart. So things do affect the Home Office. They operate so close to the margins in terms of what they can what they're operationally capable of, that anything that knocks them off course has a really serious impact and quickly backs up. So expect an operational shock at some point, I would say, for one reason or another, whether that be IT-related issues or the failed implementation of a new policy or indeed geopolitical circumstances which have an impact on movement to the UK. Expect an operational shock. If you don't, then you may not necessarily be prepared. And then finally, just how we can help with your immigration work and tying into what I've been covering. So things like sponsor license, applications of management. If you're not currently have a sponsor license and you're considering getting one, we can guide you through the process and handle it. Likewise, if you already have a license and you're not sure how to best use it, or you need more effective control over how you're using it, we manage your licenses entirely on behalf of our clients. If you're going through a restructuring, if you're going through any mergers and acquisition activity, we can provide you with full guidance and full assistance in terms of what you need to know from a visa perspective. And we've worked quite closely with our corporate and commercial teams in terms of tying up the advice on the due diligence process. Going back to the Home Office's focus on compliance audits, we conduct mock Home Office audits for our clients. So we can go out and look at your right to work data. We can look at your existing use of your sponsor license to make sure that you're ticking off all of your sponsor duties and all the records that you need to keep on file. And then finally, and probably most importantly, we do a lot of advice on how you manage your budget when it comes to immigration work. The high-level headline figures for using the immigration system is that it costs a lot, and that is true. The visa system is expensive, but there are ways you can manage that cost appropriately. There are ways that you can recover some of the costs. There are ways that you can defer some costs. There are a lot of facilities available to you in terms of refunds and in terms of thinking carefully about what length visas you're applying for, where you're recruiting from, what concessions you're eligible for. So it's really important that you understand how to manage your budget for recruitment really, really effectively. And we do a lot of work and a lot of guidance with our clients on helping them develop their recruitment budget so that they can make full use of the immigration system. And that's effectively everything from an immigration perspective. So I'll just hand back to Emma very briefly just to cover a couple of upcoming events that we've got.
Thank you, Chris. It's super helpful as always. And I think just to sort of reiterate, please do factor in the time. Yeah. I think when you're looking at your recruitment plans, or when you're wanting to bring somebody over from, a group company abroad, tell your managers, you need to think about the immigration rules. It's not as simple as somebody just turning up at an airport and hoping that they're going to get in. So, planning is always the key with these things. So, do reach out to Chris. Even if you think, you don't think you need a sponsorship license, it will come up and it will be something that you will need. And if you want to recruit that candidate, it is much better to have all those ducks in a row so you're ready to go with the recruitment, rather than saying, oh, wait, pause, we're going to have to do this, and then you lose your great candidate. So do reach out and do that. And a lot happening, and it's going to be quite interesting, Chris. We can have a race as to see when any of these employment law changes do happen to come in, and when the immigration changes may come in as well. So yeah, watch this space, sign up to our updates. I'll send out the link so you can do that if you're not already signed up already. So signing up to not just the employment update, but also to our newly published immigration update as well, that comes out monthly. So yes, we've got lots planned for this year, just kicking off with a couple of webinars that we've got planned. The first one, and really talking about, what Chris has been saying about, mergers, restructures, acquisitions. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. We're beginning to see clients contact us about, redundancy programs. And yes, we can kind of cover off the legal bits, but there are people involved in this, and more particularly your managers. So how can we look at supporting our managers when they are managing through those periods of uncertainty? So really excited about next month's webinar with Rosemary Ryan from consultancy company Represent. And then in March, I'm going to be doing a case law update webinar. A lot happening, a lot of cases that have come out, and a lot still happening. We've got the consultation on Harper and Brazil, which, if you haven't looked at that or haven't seen details of it, please do get involved, because it is causing huge head scratchy moments for HR. So do join us for those. And again, once you've signed up, you'll get invitations from us. So do watch out, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you at some in-person events as well that we've got planned. So again, watch this space. So that really leaves me to thank you all for joining us today. We've had fantastic numbers, so that's amazing. So thank you so much. I will be sending out the YouTube link as well. Thanks, Chris.
Pleasure.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for keeping us all up to date with all things immigration. Some really good common sense advice there. So enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to welcoming you on our webinar next month. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.